the identifier rm.firstname must be declared. Perfect. I intentionally got that error. We have this error because we did not create any record. Let's look at our code again now. The code that we declared our variables is only a type of a record. If you know an object-oriented programming language, you know that you don't have any object until you initialize it. Your class is only a template. This is very similar to that. We have declared a type, but did not create any record with that type. If you look at the code above, we said that we create a record with the name rm with the type of employees table. Now, this is the creation. We get the type directly from the table, but in the code below, we declared our own type. Now, we need to create a record with that type. Perfect. Now, let's create our record then. It's very simple. We simply write our name of the variable and the type. It's ramp and the type is temp. Did you see that? Pretty simple. We just write our name and the type with a space. Now, let's clear up our script output and run the code again. Great! We created our own type having 4 variables in it. Then we created a record with that type and used that in our code. Now, we got the values from our select class before. It was easy because both records and the table had the same data types with the same orders. So, can we do that with that record type too? Let's check it. By the way, I generally do some mistakes intentionally to show you the wrong way to do that. Then I show you the right way. With this way, you will see both sides and you will learn more permanently. Okay, let's check if we can use select into class with our own type of records. Let's now uncomment our select statement and comment the assignment areas. Now, let's run it. As we can see, we had an error. Let's see what causes that. The error is not enough values because we selected whole columns into our table, but our record has only 4 rows. So we need to select only the rows that our record has its type. So let's type it. Select first name, last name, salary, and hire date. Let's run it again. As we can see, we succeeded. Our select class must have exactly the same number of columns and exactly the same types with the same order with my record. I mean, if I delete last name column in here and run it, I will have an error. If I replace salary and hire date columns, I will have an error too. This is important, so be careful about that. Exactly the same number of rows and in the same order with the types. Perfect. Now we know how to create a record with 2 ways. Now, let's create a more advanced and real-world-like example for records. In this example, we will create a record of an employee including the education. Let's go then. Declare. Let's first declare a record type including the education history. Type t_edu is record. Then let's say high school. And university and university graduation date. Great. Let's type our employee type similar to that we did before. Type t_emp is record and first name 50, for example. Last name employees dot last name person type and salary not null default 1000. In here I added not null keywords, but one thing to remember. If you set a variable as not null, either you need to write a default value like we did in here, or we can directly assign a value with only changing default text with colon EQ. Hire date, it's a date, depth, ID, employees, dot departments, ID, person type. Now, I said that we can have another record type inside a record type. Let's add another record in my employee record then. Department, departments, person row type. In here, I added a record with row type attribute. We can also add a user-defined type. Now, let's add our education type then. It is t_edu. What we learned in here is a record can be of one type, but a type can have multiple types. So if you want to have multiple records in one box, you need to create another type and put them all in it. Then use that type as one record type for a record. So now let's create our record then. Remp, it is temp type. As we know, we create our records with a name and the type name. It's so simple. Let's continue then. Begin. Now we will get some data into our record from the database. Salary, hire date, and department ID into remp dot, let me copy that again, first name, hire date, remp dot depth ID. Our employee ID is, let's say, 146. We assigned data only some scalar variables in our record, but we can assign data into our inner record type, which is our department and education here. So let's start with the departments. Just like the remp record, we can select into our department record with remp dot prefix. Now let's see that. Select all the columns into remp dot department from departments where department ID is equal to remp dot depth ID. We get this value from here. As you can see, pretty same. The only difference is, since it's an inner record type, we prefix with the outer record type and a dot. Now, let's assign some values to the education record. We can select into that too, but we don't have any table about that data. So we will assign manually one by one. Let's start then. Ramp dot education dot, let me copy that, and high school is equal to, let's say, Beverly Hills. That uni graduate date is equal to, let's say, January and 13, for example. Now let's write our university. Let's say Oxford. Now let's print our variables to see if we succeeded or not. Ramp dot first name let me copy ramp again, last name, and earns. We do the same example. Salary and hired at. Hire date. Great. Let's see if we can reach to the inner records. She graduated from rm.education.university at let me copy the date. Let's DBMS output again. Her department name is rm.department.department name. And our AND keyword. Let's see the whole code in one worksheet. Yes, this is the complete code that we have written now. Perfect. Let's run our code and see if it works. Oops, I have a typo. Hire date emp. It's line 19, so let's toggle line numbers, and in 19 hire date emp. Let's clear up and run again. We mistaken again, so hire date comma and ramp dot department ID. Let's run. Karen Partners earns 13 and 500 and hired at that time. She graduated from Oxford and her department ID is Sales Department. Let me summarize what we did in here. With this example, we learned that we can create both our own record type or we can use a table type for a record. Also, we can use a not null and default keywords or assignments operators inside our records. Besides, we can use a record inside of a record. If we want a complex record, we need to create a complex type first. Because a record cannot have multiple types, it can have only one, but one type can have multiple types in it. We do that with this way. Alright, real-world examples are not so different than that example. If you have a bigger and a real database, you now have the background to create more complex examples. Actually, we do that with very similar ways. Do not be afraid of the real work. It's pretty the same. You will see that when you start a job if you don't have, and you know that if you already have a job. But there is one difference. It is collections. We sometimes use record single, but generally use them with collections. You will learn the collections in next lessons, and you will be able to create much better and complex examples with using records and collections together. So I think this is enough for the records. Thank you for listening. See you in the next lessons.